who is also is Director of the Watershed Management Division. Is that correct, Dave?
The watershed forester with Forest Parks and Recreation. The program manager for the Forest Watershed Program.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Representative O'Brien.
What bill does this relate to? Is it just
Loosely, it relates to a bill that we don't have on our wall, but might come over from I think maybe will come over from the Senate, and it's 146. But I don't think we're walking through the language of that. We haven't walked through the language, so I don't think we're going to look at the bill, but just get a little bit of background. And I'll just say, and we've got. We can see we got a handout. So it's within the water quality conversation writ large. And beyond that, I'm not sure what we're going to hear. So let's turn it over to review.
Great. Thank you so much. For the record, Danielle Fitzko, Commissioner of Forest Parks and Recreation. Thank you for having us here today. I wish I was there with you in person, but I'm down in New Jersey helping out my parents. So I'd love the technology that we can Zoom in. As Representative Durfee shared, that this is really about educating and awareness building around our acceptable management practices for maintaining water quality on logging jobs. We call them the AMPs. So in your work in supporting forestry, you may have heard of the AMPs. If not, you will likely hear about the AMPs. And this is just to give you an understanding of what they are and what we're doing to support the AMPs. As we mentioned, we're joined by Dave Wilcox. He's a colleague in Forest Parks and Recreation. He's our watershed forester, and he really leads our programming around the AMPs. We kind of look at it as a whole package of education and outreach, technical assistance, and then when necessary, there's certainly enforcement part of it. Dave's going to really lead the presentation today and give you sort of all the programming that we do. I just want to give you a couple highlights. The AMPs were established in 1987. So we have over 30 years of experience with the AMPs. We've certainly learned a lot over time, and they've been revised twice. The latest revision was in 2018. So Dave is going to lead that charge. He's intimately familiar with the AMPs. The AMPs themselves really are a set of practices. There are 26 practices really meant to protect water quality, mainly preventing discharges into water bodies, sediment, petroleum, and woody debris, but also thinking about soil health. As I mentioned, when we look at what FPR does, it's really a community approach with the forestry community. We lean heavily on education, outreach, and technical assistance. And I think you'll see today what Dave will show you is that we are seeing results over time. You also get to see that Dave is an author of a smartphone app. So we're trying to be as progressive as we can and get the information in the field where the work is done. We have a very scalable and accessible skidder bridge program. So it's getting the tools right on the ground where it matters. If you don't know what a skidder bridge is, you will today find out what they are. We also do a lot with on-the-ground support with inspection. So we'll go out on the ground with landowners, foresters, loggers, and help them really understand the practices. And if it's even post practice, we help them make some changes to improve water quality and protect water quality. Sometimes, unfortunately, we even have to work with them and maybe close some operations for a while until they get the right practices in place. And then when necessary, we work with Department of Environmental Conservation, environmental compliance, and we do enforcement. So that's just that we don't like to go there, but sometimes it's just necessary. Dave will share with you really, again, like I started, this is a community of practice. We work with partners, we work with landowners, foresters, and loggers, really for a wraparound program to support water quality during logging operations. What you'll hear from Dave is that our trends over the past 30 years is that complaints and violations are down, and that when foresters are doing site inspections, there's certainly a reduction in the severity of the water quality violations. And at the same time, our request for technical assistance is on the rise. So that's sort of just my brief overview. And then unless you have any questions, we'll pass it over to Dave so you can learn really more the ins and outs of the A&P.
Thank you, Commissioner Fitzko. Any questions from the committee? All right, will you be staying with us this morning?
Yes, I'm gonna hover on the screen.
Okay, all right. Thank you.
Okay, for the record, my name is Dave Wilcox. I'm the watershed forester with the Department of Forest, Parks and Recreation. And I'm going to share my screen. And sorry. Full screen mode.
There we go.
All right. So Danny gave a great overview of the AMPs, and you may hear in other states these practices referred to as BMPs, best management practices, but in Vermont in 1987, for whatever reason, they decided to call them the acceptable management practice, but they are essentially the same thing. When we created the manual, which you have in front of you, we borrowed from a lot of other states' best management practices, and like I said, they are essentially the same thing. So for whatever reason, in Vermont, they're called the acceptable management practices. And is there a way? I'm sorry, can't see my whole screen here. Sorry. So the purpose of the AMPs is to provide sound practices for logging operations in Vermont. Loggers, foresters, landowners utilize the AMPs at all times of the logging operation, both before and planning for the job, during the job, and after the job. We call it closeout, where the site is set up to be left for 15 years, 20 years. You know, logging doesn't happen year after year after year in the same stand. It comes and goes. And that cycle can be, it could be 10 or 15 years. On some sites, it could be 25 years on other sites. So in between the logging operations, we do closeout, which stabilizes the site and protects it from soil erosion and, interference with water quality. And the water quality rules in Vermont, I want to make sure you don't have my big block at the top. So as we know, discharges of waste into the waters of the state without a permit are violations of the State Water Pollution Control Act. The AMP rules promulgated under the authority of 10 VSA 1259, the discharge rules, that it states when implemented properly, the AMPs relieve a person from the obligation of obtaining a permit for discharges associated with logging operations. You simply can't work in the woods unless it doesn't have any streams. That you're going to have some discharges that are minor as long as the AMPs are properly in place. So those discharges are permitted with that caveat. And they apply to all logging operations on public and private lands. And the 26 practices that Danny mentioned applied all during the job before and after. They prevent soil erosion, minimize stream impacts. A lot of the AMPs and the new AMPs in the upgraded rules deal with stream crossings. And they apply on all the different parts of the job: truck roads, skid trails, like I said, crossings, riparian areas, which are those buffers along the sides of the streams that are important for lots of different things. Filtering the sediment out before it gets into the stream, providing shade for the stream so that the water doesn't heat up, and that's a big important part of water quality. And then just habitat and the kind of ecosystem services that the forest buffer provides along the streams, and as well as log landings, where I think are in some sense a minor part of the entire job, but a very important part because that's what people see along the road when they drive by. And whenever I get loggers in front of me, I talk about the aesthetics of logging and landing cleanup and making, making things look good so that they'll drive by 10 log jobs and they'll only remember the one that looks like a mess, unfortunately, just like any human nature. And obviously, I don't talk about the clean water, the principles that go into, what those practices actually do. And obviously disconnection of the biggest thing we do when logging is we create roads and trails, we have stream crossings, and we channel water onto that infrastructure, and the AMPs are designed to spread that back out and disconnect that water flow, that stormwater flow from getting directly into streams. Through water bars, you see in the photo on the left, proper truck road construction and spacing of cross-drain culverts and properly sized stream crossings. And we promote the use of a lot of temporary stream crossings so that you don't have to install a culvert forever, or at least for 30 or 40 years. And you can use that crossing for, a month or several months or a year that you are logging, and then when you pull it, the stream can do its thing. It's not a risk of blowing out or causing other issues. And that's where we put a lot of effort into temporary bridges and things like that. So I think I covered those are the real basics. How do you do it? What do the practices look like? And the progression of the AMPs, if you look at this on a time scale, it would be very flat, and then it would go like this for the activity that we've had with the AMPs. In 1987, they were established as a response to the Clean Water Act, and this is how Vermont showed the federal government that how we were dealing with those non-point source pollution from logging activities, and for almost 30 years, we had one manual that was the only thing similar to this manual is that it was orange. It was smaller, it was black and white, it was very straight, didn't have a lot of pictures and really good back supporting information. And the technology in 1987 was very different than we have now. So we had to upgrade it. And it wasn't necessarily in 2016 to change the rules that we went through rulemaking. It was more because when they did rulemaking in 1987, the entire manual itself, even the supporting information in the diagrams, was part of the rule. It was so you can't change any of the rule without going through rulemaking. And when we did the rulemaking in 2016, we separated the rules themselves from the manual. So we can update the manual and the supporting information as long as the rules themselves stay the same. And the way that it's shown in the manual is these blue blocks with the red lettering, that symbol that tells you what rule it is. These blue things are the rules. All of this other stuff is supporting information. So we can update the manual without having to go through rulemaking, which we couldn't before. And honestly, I think that was part of why it took 30 years to change the rules, because nobody wanted to go through it. Because it's a long process. And when we did open it up to rulemaking, we didn't, it wasn't as contentious or there weren't as many issues as we might have feared from all the different angles. We got a lot of improvements done, not only to the manual itself, but also the rules. So in 2016, they were updated. 2018, they were updated again because we found that some of the changes in 2016, when we went to the logging community and forester community to talk about the rules, there were a few missing pieces that we wanted to correct. So it wasn't as significant a rule change in 2018 as 2016, but it was very important in getting the rules to where they are today and the manual where it is. So then we came out with the manual in 2019, and then in 2022 we created a new AMP app, which I'll talk about. But basically everything in the manual you can get on your phone. It's plus there's more and there's more stuff to it as well. So I'll talk about that.
Dave, can you give us just a sense of what's in the rules now that wasn't there 10 years ago?
Yes.
Through either of the updates?
Yep, that's
Oh, good. Here we go.
Okay. So the highlights of the revisions in 2016 and 2018. So I think the biggest change was new standards for sizing stream crossing structures, both permanent and temporary. So the old rules had a sizing for temporary structures that was okay for temporary structures, but it really wasn't big enough for permanent structures. And now we have, with help from DEC river management folks, Pat Ross was a hugely helpful in creating the tables. But we have, it's essentially the same table that actually the Municipal Road General Permit borrowed it from us because they helped us create it. But anyways, permanent crossings on intermittent streams have a much more engineered sizing than they ever did. And of course, perennial streams, which are fish-bearing permanent streams, you have to go through through the river management engineers to get a stream alteration permit to put in a permanent crossing. And that was explicitly stated in the new manual, where it was not as clear in the previous manual and in the previous rules. And that's at the bottom here: compliance with ANR stream alteration rule and general permit. So that was the biggest thing I think is the stream crossing sizing for intermittent streams. We have a new AMP to address hazardous materials. We created a better table for spacing of water diversions, so it was more clear on what type of road or trail during logging or after logging. We made that more clear. We have enhanced stream buffer guidance, and now we have a 50-foot within the waterway within seeding and mulching instead of 25 feet. So we widened that area of stabilization. And then for stream crossings, in addition to the culvert aspects, we created a table strictly for bridges, for temporary bridges, and for permanent bridges on intermittent streams. So really it has to do with stream crossings. And one of the reasons for this was in 2012, the department did a timber harvest assessment where we went to 83 logging operations that were randomly located around the state. We don't have notification in Vermont. We don't have a list of logging operations to go and inspect, but we got volunteers, people to tell us where their logging operations were. We had 400 and something operations that were volunteered to us, and then we randomly selected how many we thought we could visit in a year, and we went to 83. And the 83 that we looked at, the one we did the timber harvest assessment, looked at all different aspects of logging operations. The AMPs were one of them, and we discovered that most where we were on a job that had discharges, they were associated with stream crossings and skid trails and within the forest buffer, which is kind of obvious that that's where it would be. And that's why we're putting all this energy into stream crossings, with the upgraded sizes, getting the logging, the skidder bridges out there and doing the education and outreach, and so on. So that's where we got the information to focus on this that we're doing now. And then, so the other thing that I don't have listed here, which I should have, is the manual itself is a huge highlight of the 2016 and 2018 revisions. And I'm pretty proud of the manual. It was a lot of work, but I think it really has everything in it that would help somebody be successful in protecting water quality on logging operations and be able to find that information. So that's another highlight. And then in 2022, last August, we released the AMP app, which was the first in our region. We looked at apps from other states like Texas and I think there was one out maybe California or Colorado that we looked at. And so we developed this specifically for Vermont. Obviously, it has the manual, a searchable way to read the manual, and you can type in keywords and it'll take you right to wherever those keywords are in the manual. But it also has other tools. And one example is a clinometer, which it's pretty neat where you can, it's an angle gauge. Basically, you look up the skid trail and you get the slope. And when you hit the screen, it gives you the table for that slope and tells you how far apart your water bars need to be or how wide the forest buffer needs to be based on that slope. So loggers and foresters don't need to have the manual and a clinometer and then be able to put the two together. All they got to do is point it up the hill, tap the button, and I was on a job the other day and I showed it to a logger and I show it to everybody I get a chance to. And he said, well, I really can't make the excuse that we don't have the information. And I thought that's just what we're looking for,
Is the app free?
It is free. Yep. And it doesn't track anything. It doesn't, there's no, you get the app and you can use it. And there's also, in addition to the clinometer, there's this job details with mapping function, which allows you to select a map of your area. And then on that map, you can locate AMP practices that are necessary. And then you can share that with like your operator who's going to do closeout, and they would know where to find all that stuff. As well as there's a cost calculator where it helps. One of the things that we find with the logging contractors is if they, in the effort to get the job, and I have to be really careful what I say here because I have a logging contractor in the room. But when you put in a bid to cut timber, you have to take in all the costs. And some of those costs are implementing the water quality practices, the AMPs. And what we found is that not everybody puts in the right cost for that. So they get behind the eight ball so that when the job is done, they're doing their numbers and they're realizing now I need to go back and spend $3,000 doing closeout work or $2,000, whatever it is. And that's when if they haven't built that into the cost up front, they start cutting corners. And we don't want that. We want them to have that built into the cost. So we made it as easy as possible. They can put in their own type of equipment, their own hourly rate, their hourly or their material costs in the settings, and we populated those to start with, but then they can update it and customize it and really it's their own custom spreadsheet for AMP costs, which is huge, I think. And then we have a soils map, and that's one of the other things with wetland soils or hydric soils. giving folks the information to know that this soil maps are out there. You just need to find them. And with this app, all you do is hit that button and you get the soils on your phone. And it puts you on the map. It shows you where you are. I don't know.
Representative Levitt has a.
Yes, you have a question.
I just want to say, okay, I need to just confess, at first I thought, okay, you're just in love with your app. But I get it, because we're about to start doing work at my house, and having a soils map that's easily accessible is brilliant. And this is a really cool thing.
Yeah.
So you won me over.
So that's us,
Okay.
and these are the soil series around us.
And so then would this help
Talk about
me?
three buttons.
How would I, as someone who is trying to do a minimal amount of logging at my house, but trying to just clear out trees, and I do have several intermittent streams. And so will this help me know what is a wetland, what isn't a wetland, and where I should be avoiding? And like, I mean, I'm not going to bring skidders in or anything.
Right,
We're just
right,
going to, get a bunch of us with chainsaws and.
The soil map will help. There's other, so that's the one thing, and this is a great question. We weren't trying to recreate a mapping app,
Right.
because there are some great mapping apps out there. One that is I think the best it's called A&R Atlas. You folks have probably heard of it. It's a free website.
What's it called?
A&R Atlas.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And you can bring up property lines, you can bring up wetlands, all the different class of wetlands, you can bring up streams, you can bring in contours, you can bring in you can bring in wellhead identification. I mean, everything that the state has for information is available on the A&R Atlas. And so for your specific application, I think the A&R Atlas would be a better place to go,
Okay.
because it has more. So when we were high in the sky, we wanted to be able to go to a stream and hit a button and have it tell us the drainage area for that stream, because that's what we use to calculate culvert sizes. Well, it's still only 2023 and we don't have connectivity everywhere. So they told us we can't do that with the budget that you have. So we didn't try to create a mapping app, but some of the things like the soils, like the locations of the AMPs, those are the things that we could bite off with this app at this point.
Got it. Okay.
But the A&R Atlas, it's unbelievable for the amount of information you can get right at your desktop.
That's amazing.
I just looked it up, ANR Atlas.
Yep.
I'm not getting it on my, if there's another title or if I'm.
Maybe it's the website. It's not an app.
Oh, that's why.
It's a website.
All right, sorry.
Yeah, ANR Natural Resources Atlas.
Thank you.
Sorry about that.
No.
That wasn't.
I assumed actually
Yeah.
it was.
So that's the, when you're creating an app, and I never thought when I was in forestry school, never thought I'd be creating it. We didn't know what apps were, but once you start, it's hard to stop. Like it really, it's amazing what you can put in there. So some of the other things, we have a contact page, and click a button and you have all your district foresters for AMPs and heavy cutting. Hit the button and you're calling them on your phone, or you've got the email, you can email them. We have all the county foresters listed in here. We're going to be upgrading the app over time. And one thing that I already realized, we didn't put in the web page for renting bridges. So that's going to be a quick link in here as well. And then we have the report a spill. If you have in Vermont, if you have a spill of hazardous material over 2 gallons, you need to report it and do the proper cleanup. And that button will give you the information to do that. Plus, it'll give you information on how to properly clean that up.
Representative O'Brien, question. Do AMPs vary depending on soil type? You know, so if the job might be different in Addison County with the clay versus Danville with a loam.
Well, the AMPs themselves don't vary, but the AMPs that you would implement would. So in an uplands, you know, a well-drained soil, you can have a skid trail and you probably won't need to put brush down to support yourself. But if you're on a really mucky soil that's doesn't have that well-drained properties and it's soft and you want to prevent rutting, and which we all do, we put the brush down and travel on that so that we don't have that disturbance to the soil. So it's not the practices don't, but the kinds of practices that you use will. So you in a tough site, you might use them all. In a really well-drained site without a lot of streams, you know, it might just be putting in some water bars and shaking out some hay on the landing and closing out your stream crossing. So the planning, and that's the other, when we do the education and outreach, we really talk about planning and using all of your resources with mapping or whatever you have to prepare yourself so you know what practices you're going to need. If you need a temporary culvert, you got to go get one. If you need a temporary bridge, you got to go get one. And that's the message that we push. So that's where the soils map is helpful. You know, if you don't know the site and you're traveling to another town that you haven't worked in, you want to look at the soils map and see what the soils are like. And the soil series will actually tell you all the different suitability factors for different, whether it's logging or farming or development, septic, whatever. Really a lot of information in there.
Representative Lipsky.
David, thank you. I want to follow up on Representative Levitt's question. This manual, and I have to say, I first interacted with David, well, maybe a long time ago, but when FPR first came to introduce these upgraded rules, I think there was a meeting in Waterville, went out to a site, and there were subsequent meetings that the job that, and I have acknowledged or advocated when it came to forest products here in the building, what a evolution and a raised bar industry where the folks working in the forest, the loggers and foresters, the responsibility has had a steep increase in responsibility and naturally cost. But the big challenge was for FPR to actually educate a workforce that had been moving uphill very slowly. But this manual, which finally came into print in 2018 or 2019, right before the pandemic, gives every operator, every landowner, and every enforcer clear examples. I've taken this into the woods with landowners, you know, acre by acre. Things like the soil's the deciding factor. One of the biggest factors is how large is the watershed. Is it a 5-acre watershed or is it a 250-acre watershed? Because that's the stormwater and the natural runoff. And if you're a half a mile below the top of the watershed, it's a whole nother world than if you're just on a little knoll that's 50 vertical feet above you. So the app, as you know, I'm technologically challenged. So the app, you know, Sam Lincoln and leaders like, you know, Dave Wilcox have developed this, and it's natural for some people. But for everyone, this manual has been a game changer. The responsibilities are there, and they've had to convince us that we need spill kits on every job, in every piece of equipment. You know, there are levels of training that they lead. There are Vermont lead the logger education for advanced professionalism. And there's also a broader master logger category that's more regional, and they all hold these standards as none of them are optional. And the standards keep getting stricter. And that's what it takes if you want to go in the woods in the 21st century. This is how it's going to go, and it's going to be more complex. David has led initiatives where on forest ecology, where you're trying to create habitat as a value for a given landowner for migratory songbirds. Or now we're entering the carbon forest challenge. There is this universe only expanding, it's not narrowing. And that leadership of education is, and in essence enforcement too, is just it's been a game changer. Not a negative one, a challenging one. It's challenging for those that are writing the rules, enforcing the rules, and those that have to do the standards. So when I proudly say, you know, loggers, anyone working in the woods today, you know, the amount of responsibility, liability legally to the landowner is just, it's very serious. And I think I will say that there was kicking and screaming 8 or 10 years ago as these new rules came in place, but that's all ended. If you want to be in business, you do it right. And these tools that we all have now, you know, are priceless. I take this in the woods every time I go to meet a landowner.
Jed, you're an analoger. What's the word for you?
A what?
Analoger.
As an analog.
Well,
You need more coffee.
I'm glad you brought that up because not everybody wants to have an app, you know, and simultaneously as we develop the app, the app took like 2 years to develop, but when we were getting the app to go live and testing it and doing all that sort of stuff, I printed 2,000 more of these just because I didn't want to run out of the printed manuals because I knew people would be wanting to have them. And it was, we made it, you know, and that was the nice thing is I could go into the manual and not, of course, the rules didn't change at all, but I had a few like typos and tweaks and, you know, little tiny things and made the change. And so the 2022 version is most people wouldn't be able to find the differences between the 2019 version and the 2022, but it's, we have plenty of them. I don't think we're going to run out anytime soon. So, yeah. And the education and outreach is, to me, it's my favorite part of the job, to go out and meet people and walk around the woods and talk shop and try to be, instead of the enforcer, be the resource, you know, for folks and not have a, you know, you will do this is, you know, these are the rules and this is how we're going to work together to accomplish that. We do leap trainings, master logger workshops, bridge workshops, and we cross-pollinate with other folks in the agency. In this photo, I can see 3 people from other departments in A&R from DEC. There's a stream alt person, there's a wetlands person, and another stream alt person at the workshops, sometimes presenting, sometimes just there so that we're all on the same page. We try to do training so that we're consistent and we're giving the same message and not sporadic with our, you know, that's the worst thing that could happen is call 2 different people and get 2 different answers. And we really try to prevent that from happening. And also with the technology we have webinars online on the website now. You can go see a webinar on the AMPs. You can see a webinar on the app. You can see a video on installing a truck bridge. You can see a video about clean water practices, one of the, just the kind of a really overall general video about the forestry sector and clean water practices. So we're trying to use our tools to get that information out to folks. And in the last 6 years, we've been doing temporary bridge cost share or grant programs to get more temporary bridges in use. And in 5 out of the last 6 years, we've gotten 59 wooden bridges to folks and 10 steel temporary bridges to folks. Now, a temporary bridge is, this is a photo of 3 different temporary bridges. The bridge on the left is a 25-foot steel bridge, and it's in 2 panels, and you basically create your abutments outside of the bank full width, and you set that bridge on either, in this case, concrete blocks or big logs, anything that will hold it up and not sink into the bank. And then that's how you cross the stream. You stabilize the approaches. And this is before we put some massive abutment or bumper logs on the side of the bridge. There's a good shot of just the bridge. And then the bridge in the middle is a temporary truck bridge. That's so I skipped. I should have mentioned that we also have, the department owns larger heavy duty truck bridges that we rent to people. We got these bridges through grants with the U.S. Forest Service and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. So we didn't pay anything for the material, for the bridges themselves. And we rent the bridges to logging contractors. We use them on state land when we need a bridge. We don't charge ourselves the $100 a month it costs to rent it, but $100 a month is peanuts for a bridge. And we don't want the cost ever to be a reason that someone says they didn't use a bridge. So it's really just to try to get people to check in with us every month, and we can also, they have some skin in the game and they don't just leave it in forever and have us chase them down. And they put a big deposit in and so on. So that bridge in the middle is our 40-foot temporary truck bridge. That is 40 feet long. It will span 35 feet. It needs couple feet on either end. And it folds. And when you open it up and set it on the abutment, you can drive a loaded log truck right across there instantly, basically. It's rated for 100,000 pounds.
What would people do before using this methodology? Would they just ford the river?
Well, fording is an option, or building very complicated wooden bridges where you get some big hemlocks and you wind the cable around the logs and you clamp it and then you hold your breath and drive across. There are, like, Lathrop's had a couple Bailey bridges, I believe. And they still have a 50-foot ABM bridge. So there were other bridges out there, but they weren't like readily available to rent. So, but most of the time, I would see people building a wooden bridge out of material they had on site. And then it would be, then they would take out the cables and put it on the log truck and send it to the mill.
Yeah.
But this is so much easier than that. And yeah. And actually that middle picture is the first time we use this bridge. It's down in Braintree, and they put the abutments in below the existing bank so that they didn't need a stream alteration permit. We work with the river management engineers all the time. So if you don't stick up above the bank and you're back behind bank full width, you can leave the abutments there, and then the next 15 years later, when you need the bridge again, you can just put it right back on those abutments. It doesn't change the flood plain or anything like that. And actually, this bridge on this land base, they're renting it again after only 5 years because they're going to go farther up the road, and they might actually build a permanent bridge to access the timberland after this. But So that bridge is gonna end up right back where it was, right on those same abutments. And then the bridge on the right is our 30-foot bridge. That's actually at a state forest sale in Victory State Forest. That was used for skidding across, but that's a 30-foot bridge and it spans 25 feet. And that's on, I can't think of the name of the river, but that was dragged in with an excavator. We used logs on either end of the set the bridge across, put some brush and poles and snow, and it was, you would walk across there, you wouldn't even know you were on a bridge. And it was just literally zero impact to the stream, which in the old days, they might have tried to freeze that in and you go across the ice or put some poles in there. You know, they've been creative in things they would do, but this just makes it a little bit easier. Well, makes it a lot easier. And nowadays, equipment is big enough that, you know, that bridge in the middle weighs 27,000 pounds and you need 2 good excavators to move it, but that hasn't been a problem, you know, with this day and age. And I wanted to, I'm going to back up, I apologize. These bridges have been granted to people who own the bridges when the grant is done. They take the bridge and use it. But the last batch of bridges that we have built are going to be granted to the natural resource conservation districts around the state. And they will use those wooden bridges to rent to loggers so that, loggers will have the ability to rent, and that program has been around since 2014, but those bridges have been used up and damaged faster than they've been replaced. So there's a, you know, kind of a void there of viable bridges to be rented. So we're infusing that program with more wooden bridges so that they can be rented by loggers. Every logger I talk to that wants to own a bridge, there's another logger that wants to rent a bridge. So we kind of have to do both.
Dave, I'm just going to flag we're running close to the end of our time. We got about 5 minutes. Yeah. I know you've got more slides to share. We can have you go through them quickly.
I can go
back this afternoon or some other time if you want.
I can go through them pretty quickly.
Okay.
Is there a question?
But just briefly, this committee went on a field trip 2 weeks ago. We drove by Fontaine Lumber.
Mm-hmm.
No one, I talked about Skidder Bridge. I said, look out the window. They're where FPR has contracted to make them.
The picture on the right is their bridge making shed. And that's a drill that drills 4 feet in one shot through the bridges. And then they put holes in, tighten them up, they roll it down, they drill another hole. That one person can build an entire bridge and, well, they can do like 2 bridges a day, 2 or 3 bridges a day. And Fontaine has really gone, you know, out of their way to be that resource to do that.
And how long are those lengths?
The wooden bridges are 20 feet long and the steel bridges are 25 feet long. So I apologize for running long-winded. I typically do that, but I have just a few slides on our monitoring and enforcement program. So our enforcement program is a complaint-driven process. We don't go out and inspect log jobs until we get a complaint. And we also have a technical assistance program that's free of charge. All you have to do is call up one of the AMP foresters, which are located in the districts. And a lot of them are dual purpose. They're state lands foresters that respond to AMPs and heavy cutting as a duty, as, you know, kind of an assigned thing. And so in 2022, these are the numbers of complaints investigated. And of those 29, 15 of them had discharges. And 0 were referred to enforcement. And that means that in all of those cases, the loggers were cooperative. The practices to implement were relatively minor, and there wasn't a significant discharge. We have, you know, we can't run to enforcement every time and we don't want to. We want to educate folks and get them to come into compliance that way. We do have to go to enforcement when we have poor cooperation, very significant discharges, and it's typically they're repeat offenders, or they should have known that what they did was wrong. And we had 27 technical assistance visits, so almost as many bloggers called us up and asked us to come out as had complaints against them. And so the total number of AMP activities is 56.
Representative Rice?
Is there any effort for public education around what should drive a complaint? You know, like, it feels to me like there are probably a lot of people who wouldn't know what a discharge looked like if it was happening up the road from them, or.
I don't know of any public, education of what is a complaint. We talk to people all the time when they call up and say, my neighbor's logging and I don't like it. We don't run out there and look around until they, and we don't try to plant we need to know that there's a connection with water and that there's a likelihood of some kind of discharge before we're going to go out and investigate a logging operation. We're not and as you can see, 29 complaints in 15, so less than half of them, just about half of them, had actual evidence of discharge. So even the ones that we got complaints on weren't all, I don't want to say they weren't legitimate complaints, but they didn't have discharges. So, but that's I don't know how to address that, getting that message out to people, but certainly people know when they see a log landing in a stream that's running brown, and they're not all like that, but yeah, that's a good question. I haven't had that question before. I don't know how folks would.
Representative O'Brien?
Are there AMPs for just to consider what might happen with invasives and maybe work with other parts of the A&R, just because a lot of when land's disturbed, you're creating potentially a habitat.
There are certainly practices that are talked about in general forest management that deal with invasives, for sure. And the fact that invasives, push out and displace native habitat or native species that are really good at protecting stream banks. Japanese knotweed is one it's all the stream banks and it doesn't let anything else grow, but it's terrible at really stabilizing the stream. So, but yes, there are lots of none of the not in the AMP manual does it talk about invasives as much, other than we try to recommend that people don't go out because we do have people go out and seed and mulch. We don't want them to bring hay that's infested with invasives. We recommend seed-free straw, which on state land we can require, but on private land we can't really require that. We can make it an AMP, So this slide, did that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay. So this slide just gives the trends over time of the number of cases investigated, not way back to 1987, but from 2004 on. And I think I'd call this the modern age of our data collection. I could go back and probably find those numbers, but and then the evidence of discharge trends down, just like the number of cases, and then the request for technical assistance is going up, and that's just what we really want to see. And then this is we keep track of the discharges that we find, where we find them on the logging operation, and this is just the biggest culprit is within the stream buffer, skid trails and stream crossings, and that's where we're putting our efforts into temporary bridges and culvert sizing and bridge sizing and the expanded 50 feet instead of 25 feet and so on. So really, in summary, we're educating and providing technical assistance and financial assistance to try to get the job done.
Representative Rice?
Is there a further zoomed out number? So all the numbers we're looking at here are complaints investigated and then evidence, but you mentioned that people call up, they say, my neighbor's logging out, I don't like it. You're not necessarily investigating all of those. So is there a number of just sort of complaints made?
Typically, no, so the short answer is no. When we do get complaints, we have other resources, you know, if someone really wants to know what's happening, maybe it's a current use issue and a county forester will get notified. If we can tease out what the problem is or what we think might be the next best person to call, county foresters often get tagged and say, okay, maybe you can help this person with this.
But you don't keep that data?
I don't know. We don't. I don't. And the county foresters keep all sorts of information on their going out to UVA parcels and doing inspections and all that, and how many people they talk to. But I don't know that there's a way to tease out the total number of logging calls that come in. I don't know that that's available. I don't get the sense that it's that big a number. Certainly, if we get 30 complaints roughly, and I think that number tracks close. I bet we don't turn away 10 or 15% of that, you know, or turn away, say, okay, we're not going out there. And sometimes some of those come back and say, yeah, now I see it. You know, and some people figure out what it takes to get us out there when they say the right things. I mean, that's the human nature. Smart. But we try not to, we're not in the business to bother law-abiding citizens out doing their thing and people wanting to cut wood on their land that's their right to do and so on, as long as they're within all of the laws. So I think that's my last slide.
Okay. Commissioner Fitzko, I see you have a hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to add a little bit to what Dave was sharing, just to pull in our team of county foresters that are 13 of them across the state, and to remind everybody that 2 million acres are enrolled in the use value appraisal program where the AMPs must be applied on UVA lands, and our county foresters do site inspections every 10 years on those properties that are enrolled in UVA. And they also just are a network of education and outreach for both forest landowners and for anybody who has a question about forestry, of forests. And I think there's a lot of education that goes on. They may call and not like what they see, but a lot of times they don't always understand what they're looking at. And so the county foresters are there to educate them about forest management, that whatever the silviculture practice was, is thinking about the future forest. So that's just another network that works in concert with Dave's team. I also just want to recognize and applaud Dave for all the great work that he does. He's pretty much running this, he has a team, but it's Dave, and there's only one other person that's full-time in watershed forestry for FPR. And so just a robust body of work for a pretty tiny team. So that was it. But I know what it was now.
Thank you, Commissioner, and Dave, thank you for walking us through this and giving us a sort of a little bit of a basic. If we get a bill in over the next few days and you would like to come back in and testify on the actual bill, we'd be happy to have you. And if there, and even if we don't, if there's more information that you think would be helpful for the committee, I know we've really just touched on what I'm sure is a much bigger body of statute and rules, and maybe it would be useful to have you come back either later this spring or next January.
I'd be happy to do that. Yeah.
And now you know what AMPs are and what a skidder bridge is.
Yeah, well, yes, if we didn't know that, and some of us did know that already, but great. All right, let's take a quick break. We've got more testimony scheduled for 11, so let's try to keep it 5